I can't believe it, Chester said with shock. I know. All these cookies and no milk? Harold tried digging through the bag, hoping to find the cookies. Oh, never mind. She packed the milk, too. He opens the lid and drinks from it. Anastasia taps him on the shoulder and points at Kryptina. Wow! Kryptina was a vampire this whole entire time? His eyes widen with shock. Anastasia, help me out here. He turns to her. Just then Anastasia suddenly begins to feel weak and she falls over, resting her hand on her forehead. Harold looks at her with shock. Kryptina looked at them with sadness. She then transforms into a bat and flies away. Kryptina! Chester cries as he reached his hand out to her. Just then, they all heard soldiers marching from behind them. They turned to see Abraham Van Helsing was in the lead, riding a white horse. He was wearing his silver armor, his long purple cloak, and long purple hat. He carried lots of garlic, wooden stakes, and crosses. Good hunter. Have you lost your senses? Abraham Van Helsing asked. Kryptina is one of them, Chester answered back with a whisper, holding a small piece of fabric from Kryptina's cape. I know she is, and that's why I'm going to have to put an end to her. What? But you can't! Chester stepped towards him with worry. You've grown soft. Chain him. He turns to his vampire hunters. We'll deal with him later. And as for these two, send them home. Two of the vampire hunters escorted Harold and picked up Anastasia, carrying her back to the city. Kryptina flew up to Alaric and the rest of the school. Kryptina? Alaric smiled at her with relief. They headed into the castle. They entered the darkest room. The room was filled with coffins. There was spider webs on the corners of the room. There was dim candles, and there was rats that ran around the room. The coffins, this must be where Alaric and the whole school sleeps, Kryptina thought. We'll place her here until we can figure out how we are going to heal her, Oxblood said. I never seen anything this bad before, Alaric said, laying on his mother's side, looking at Kryptina with tears running down his face. Kryptina rested her hand on his and looked at him, feeling sorry. Sir? Henderson ran over to Oxblood. They're coming, and they got lots of garlic, crosses, and wooden stakes with them. What are we going to do now? Thorne looked at the window. I hate to say it, but Henderson is right. They're almost here, and we won't be able to take them down with that smell of garlic and wooden stakes that can use against us. I think I got in. Oxblood was just about to answer, but before he could, Kryptina leaps in front of them with her eyes narrowed. I'll hold them off. Kryptina quickly ran out of the castle and headed towards the angry vampire hunters. Oh, it's just like that human traitor to go off back to her vampire hunter friends and share with them our secrets while we just sit here like sitting ducks. I don't trust her. Hey, Thorne steps in. She never told them she was seeing us, and she saved Alaric's mother tonight. What more do you need for you to trust her? Thorne stomped her foot on the ground. Follow her. Alaric points towards the castle entrance. What? Oxblood opens his hands with shock. The whole school of vampires flew outside of the castle looking for Kryptina. Are you all crazy? Kryptina stood on top of a large hill as she could see all the vampire hunters from miles away. They were trying to burn down the whole forest. She assumed it must be to take away all the shade that helped to keep the sunlight from turning them into ash. Kryptina was trying to find a way to stop them, but before she could, she heard the sound of wind from behind her. She turned to see it was the whole school of vampires, all transforming back into themselves. Lady Kryptina! Thorne rushed up to her. Don't worry, we're here to help. Thorne held her hands with a smile. What about Alaric? Kryptina asked. He's still with our mother. It doesn't look good. Now, how are we going to stop those guys? Duke leaned in. There is a lot of them, even more than us, Klaus said. Are you really going to trust her? They all turned to see Oxblood standing there crossing his arms. Yes, the whole school said, standing beside Kryptina. They were about to argue, but before they all could hear the vampire hunters getting closer towards them. We can drive them out. Back. But don't be afraid, Kryptina looked at the vampires. They're in our forest. I'm not trusting a human, Oxblood cried, crossing his arms looking away from her. Do you have a better idea? Kryptina and Thorin said. Well, Oxblood lowered his arms and turned towards them. He rolled his eyes. I can't believe I'm trusting a human, said, all right. Kryptina turned towards them. We are vampires. Let's go. Everyone, Abraham Van Helsing took out his crossbow. Load your crossbows. They began marching deeper into the forest, loading their crossbows, and they continued to burn the forest. Take cover in the trees. Thorin and Henderson ran behind the trees. Use their traps. Two vampire hunters were chasing Klaus until they suddenly stepped on top of their own traps and swung upside down. Draw their fire and strike them from the shadows when they're reloading. Two vampire hunters were reloading their crossbows until all of a sudden Duke and Oxblood came flying towards them, causing them to drop their crossbows and scream with fear. They ran away, leaving the forest. Alec tried giving his mother some of his blood, hoping it would heal her. I can't do it, Mother. I'm just not strong enough. Tears began to fall from his eyes until he looked up and noticed writing on the ceiling. He wiped his nose. The school. We need the school. What is this? One of the vampire hunters asked, looking at a small drop of blood on the ground. Just then Duke and Oxblood came flying towards him, causing him to drop his crossbow and run. Ah! Oh man, this is even better than your class! Duke giggled, watching the humans run away in fear. What? Oxblood cried. Oh, nothing. Duke quickly turned away, hoping Oxblood would forget about it. Just then, the forest began to burn brighter and brighter as all the animals ran away. Reload! Reload! Abraham Van Helsing cried. Kryptina was sleeping on every vampire hunter, causing them to fall and lose their wooden stakes. She kicked one of them into a mud puddle. She hissed, causing one of the vampire hunters to run away. Just then, Kryptina and all the other vampires could hear Alex hiss from a distance. Kryptina and all the other vampires transformed into bats and flew towards the castle. Some of them flew right past the vampire hunters, causing them to scream with fear and run away. Get back here and reform your rights, Abraham Van Helsing cried. He turned towards the vines that were burnt to a crisp. Hunters, don't let them get away. If we can't get them, the sun will. The vampire hunters load the cannon. Slay the foul demons. He raises his wooden stakes, aiming it towards the castle. All the vampires quickly flew into the castle with Kryptina falling from behind them. Just then, the cannon fires as the vampires all flew into the castle. Kryptina turned and she looked as her eyes went out in fear. Quick, everyone, gather around. Alaric opened his hands. I need your help. All the vampires gathered around him and his mother. Kryptina? Alaric opened his hands with concern. Where's Kryptina? Alaric looked back and forth, puzzled. Kryptina was laying on the ground until she heard Abraham Van Helsing. Our victory is at hand, hunters! Fire! Kryptina quickly opened her eyes and she got up. Kryptina transformed into a bat and she flew right towards Van Helsing and his hunters. Hunters! Fire! No! Chester cried, reaching out his hands. You've grown soft, Abraham Van Helsing said, turning towards him. He then punched Chester in the face, causing Chester to fall onto the ground unconscious. The hunters tried to fire the cannon, but before they could get the chance to, Kryptina leaped onto the cannon, causing it to fire upwards. Kryptina quickly flew up in the air and she landed on the ground, falling over. Abraham Van Helsing steps towards Kryptina. He was just about to end her, but before he could, Snowy leaps in on top of him, scratching him until Abraham Van Helsing threw her off. Foul cat! He cried with anger. Oh, no you don't! Klaus flies in, ready to beat him, but before he could, Van Helsing takes out Garlic, causing Klaus to back away. My God's glory punishes thee, vanquishes thee. He takes out his wooden stake, aiming it for Kryptina's chest. Alaric flew right out of the castle. He then noticed Van Helsing had Kryptina and Klaus cornered. Kryptina! Alaric cried with fear. Abraham Van Helsing was just about to strike her, but before he could get the chance to, he felt someone slam into his side, causing him to fall onto the ground. Van Helsing widened his eyes, and he backed up with shock as he noticed it was Lydia standing before him. She was pale as a ghost. She had long fangs. She was still wearing her black dress, but with a long black cape with torn edges and purple on the inside. Her black hair was even longer now, and her eyes were a light purple color. "Lydia?" Abraham Van Helsing said with shock, slowly picking up a wooden stake from behind him. Lydia turned to Klaus. "Are you all right?" She grabbed his hands, pulling him up. You saved me," Klaus said, leaning towards her chest, smiling with relief. "Lydia?" Abraham Van Helsing got up. You, I can't even begin to say a word. I can't believe you, after all we've been through. You are my girl. That bite must have gone deeper than I thought." He took out his wooden stake. Lydia rested her hand on Klaus as they both got up. Kryptina got up and she was about ready to leap in, but before she could, Alaric steps in between them. "I'll handle this." "Oh, how touching this is," Abraham Van Helsing laughed. "You know that the first time I caught your mother, you tried to hypnotize me, and it never worked." He waved his hand as he continued to laugh at him. "Is there something about me you find amusing?" Alaric narrowed his eyes and made fists. "Just the fact that this is going to be a quick fight. After all, you're just a kid. Your father fought better than you ever did." Alaric grinded his fangs. "Alaric?" Kryptina rested her hand on his shoulder. "Relax and leave this to me." Alaric looked to see that Van Helsing was standing very close to the edge. Kryptina, Klaus, and Lydia stood back. "What's going on here?" Oxblood asked. Klaus pointed at Alaric and Van Helsing. Alaric narrowed his eyes, stepping towards Van Helsing. He then began to wiggle his fingers. "Look deep into my eyes. Deeper, deeper, deeper. And you're out. Now you are a dog." Van Helsing looked at him, lifting a brow. "A dog?" He looked at him for a moment. He began to laugh very hard. "Me? A dog? Ha 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 ha! You're like the most embarrassing vampire child I've ever dealt with before." He was cut off as he realized he stepped far too close to the edge. Van Helsing tried to catch his balance, but before he could, he looked into Alaric's eyes. "You!" Alaric narrowed his eyes and made fists with anger. "You are now a dog." Just then they noticed Van Helsing finally caught his balance back. They all backed up. Van Helsing stepped towards them, narrowing his eyes until they suddenly saw him sitting down and panting with a smile on his face. "Alaric!" Kryptina ran towards him and hugged him. "You did it! He really thinks he's a dog!" Lydia said with a smile. "Well done, Alaric!" Oxblood waved out his hands. "I know you will pass with flying colors." "You did it, buddy!" Klaus smiled. Van Helsing suddenly noticed a black cat walking by. Van Helsing barked at the cat and chased after the cat into the bushes. They all giggled as they watched him chase the black cat away. "Hey, wait a minute." Kryptina looked at Lydia with confusion. "How did you become a vampire?" Lydia's eyes looked upwards as she smirked to herself. Flashback. Lydia giggled as she slowly snuck up behind Klaus as he was watching the love statues while they were both sitting inside a small heart-shaped love chair inside the tunnel. Lydia slowly snuck up behind him. "Ha ha ha!" Klaus pointed at one of the statues. "Lydia, look! Doesn't that make you wanna—" Klaus turned towards Lydia, but before he could finish his sentence, Lydia pushed him into the water as Klaus tried to grab her, but as he did, he fell towards one of Lydia's wrists, causing his fangs to sink into her wrist as he fell into the water. "Ouch!" Lydia narrowed her eyes as she looked down at her wrist, seeing 2 little bite marks on her wrist. End of flashback. They all smiled with relief until they all heard Thorn from a distance. "She won't wake up! She won't wake up!"